The recording will be made available to everyone after the session. So as I mentioned, if you've got any questions, please use the question and answer pod rather than the chat pod, and we will come to them at the end. We are ready to begin, I believe. So if I can introduce you to Dan, who'll be presenting this webinar. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Emily. Welcome along, everyone. Thank you very much for that. We're nearly at the 100 participant mark, which is always lovely to see. So thank you much, everyone, for attending. As Emily said, this is going to be recorded, but I'll go through a few little housekeeping options in a moment as well. Welcome to our return of our webinar for demystifying the process of accreditation. This is basically to allow us to better support you in attaining accreditation for your services, demystifying that process and just making you more familiar with those aspects. I'm Daniel Boyland. I've worked for UKAS now for nearly 4 years, originally as an assessment manager in healthcare, but I now work within the commercial training team, but I still also assess technical aspects of healthcare services. Prior to that, I worked in the NHS for 14.5 years in various roles and participated in 3 assessment cycles under ISO 1509 before moving on to UKAS. As Emily said, we've got that recording, but also the presentation slides and any FAQs will be passed on to you after the event. And just to remind you, use our Q&A option. Really good to get those questions coming in, because if you're thinking that, I'm sure someone else wants to ask it as well. If you have any issues, also raise that in the Q&A and one of our team will support you if you have any issues with display or things like that as well. Anything we don't get to address here, we'll put in the FAQs and we'll pass those on to you afterwards. Plus, we'll transcribe all our responses that we've had from this as well. So first of all, why are we here today? Over the next kind of 20 minutes, we're going to aim to help you find your way through the process by educating you a little bit more on what accreditation is, provide clarity on the steps required in the accreditation journey with UKAS. Hopefully, they'll support you and with the familiarity and kind of take away some of that fear or anxiety that comes with that process sometimes. These are kind of the subject matters we're going over. We're going to give you a little bit of background on who UKAS are, what is accreditation, the value of accreditation, and what particularly UKAS can offer, a little bit about the assessment process in detail, and ultimately as well, how do you get to apply or how do you move through that process to get that started with yourselves. So let's get started with who UKAS are. We are the sole national accreditation body for the United Kingdom. Although we're not part of government, accreditation is deemed a public authority activity, and we work in the public interest. Therefore, we're recognised and appointed by government to assess organisations for certification, testing, inspection, and calibration. These aren't all the areas we cover, but they do make a majority of that. Founded in 1966, originally as BCS, NATLAS and NAMAS, for those who know the history of that, but we were consolidated into UKAS into 1995. We're a private non-for-profit organisation, and currently we have around about 2,600 accredited customers. We deliver around about 30 to 33,000 assessment days, and we delivered 31,000 assessment days in the last cycle. And currently we have around about 270 full-time staff. That's not including our required contracted technical assessors on all our supporting aspects to make sure we can deliver your needs. So as part of that public authority activity, UKAS has been provided with the privilege and remit to undertake its national accreditation body status. We operate under a Memorandum of Understanding with the government through the Secretary of State for Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, or BEIS for short. We engage with government and stakeholders to enable the value of accreditation and enable its wider use. We do this by ensuring we deliver an effective, technically competent professional service. And to make sure we do that, we need to make sure we engage with stakeholders' views, concerns and future priorities. Apologies, folks, I'm a little bit wobble there. And future priorities. We need to make sure that's fed into strategic planning processes through mechanisms like our Policy Advisory Forum and Council, which have various members on that, as well as technical advisory committees to make sure we're meeting those technical expertise. Our strategic direction in UKAS is vital to ensure we remain engaged with customers and appraised of any developments to make sure we're at the cutting edge. This is supported by work with policymakers in government departments, agencies and regulators to explore how accreditation can be used to support the application of better risk-based outcome-focused policies. This is delivered through our policy advisory structure of the Forum and Council, but there may also be steering groups to ensure we focus on any strategic decisions to allow effective and efficient delivery of accreditation. Examples of this may include such things as our healthcare and fourth industrial revolution steering groups. In addition to government policy, UKAS accreditation underpins a broad and diverse range of economic and business activities. Therefore, we work with other government bodies, regulators and customer associations, as well as professional institutions and trade associations, including many of those that may represent indirect customers or end users, essentially trying to meet those public needs. We're also an integral part of the UK's national quality infrastructure. This is formalised into the UK QI body, which incorporates us as UKAS, along with the British Standards Institute, National Physics Laboratory, and the Office for Product Safety and Standards. They work together in that UK QI to provide a high quality framework for measurement, standards, testing and certification, as well as those accreditation services. This is instrumental in underpinning the innovative development, productivity and competitiveness of products and services in the UK and beyond. So what is accreditation and how do we fit into this? UKAS is part of the global accreditation network as the UK's national accreditation body. As part of our global accreditation network and to facilitate this, we're a signatory of various international agreements. These in turn reduce barriers to international trade with a philosophy of tested once, accepted everywhere. This reduces the need for multiple layers of review and assessment. These principles can reduce costs and open up international markets to accredited organisations. And UKAS delivers accreditation across a number of sectors that are globally recognised. These are just some of the sectors we currently work in, but this is an ever-evolving sector with over 50 new accreditation scheme products in development at this point in time. But how do we as UKAS fit into this global network and then go on to meet the needs of the public? UKAS has a remit to provide a world of confidence in the products and services to the public. It does this through a chain of assurance, initially through the demonstration of its national accreditation body status through peer review and evaluation against ISO 17011, which is the standard for national accreditation bodies. We then in turn assess performance capabilities and technical competence of bodies that provide services and products to determine organisational competence and conformance with agreed standards. This may also include how they meet regulatory, sector-specific and scheme requirements. This then provides a layer of confidence that these organisations who are accredited meet expectations to support the trust and assurance of the products and services delivered to the public and our relevant stakeholders. So when we're defining accreditation, this is the attestation and form of recognition by an authoritative body of the competence, impartiality and integrity of a conformity assessment body. This will be the applicants that are coming through our accreditation process. Those conformity assessment bodies will be assessed to perform specific tasks or activities to the relevant standard. The specific standard used for assessment and accreditation contains the relevant criteria for the type of conformity assessment that the body is applying for. This may be further broken down into specific activities, such as specific test or type of inspection. For example, just because a laboratory organisation is accredited for its competence and conformance for testing saliva swab samples for the presence of COVID-19 antigens, this does not mean it confers accreditation for testing of other samples for COVID-19 or other types of antigens for any other testing until this has been assessed by a national accreditation body. This is what limits and defines a conformity assessment body's scope of activities that is covered by accreditation. Essentially, each of these activities needs to be reviewed for conformance and competence. Once this has been assessed and granted, these are listed on the organisation's schedule of accreditation. Following the selection of the scope of accreditation, the UKAS has been peer reviewed and evaluated for that we currently deliver to our customers to support confidence in the services to the public. We sometimes hear end users, conformity assessment bodies, or service providers interchangeably using the terms accreditation and certification. However, there are two distinct steps on the quality assurance ladder. Certification is the assessment of whether a management system, product, or person meets the criteria laid out in a recognized standard or scheme. Whereas sitting the rung above, accreditation is the determination of the technical competence and capability of the certification body to perform specific activities under a recognized international standard, national standard, or scheme. Therefore, a certification body would generally be auditing the process and systems of an organization who wish to gain certification. Whereas UKAS or any other accrediting body across the globe will check the checkers, ensuring that the certification bodies have been assessed and are meeting their accreditation criteria, providing a service that can be relied upon. So assessment, auditing, and certification is very different things. So what does accreditation offer? Or what's the point of doing that? As the UK's national accreditation body and through our mutual recognition with global accredited services, UKAS can support and enable overseas market opportunities. Through the process of external review by UKAS and other accrediting bodies, the assessment will deliver an executive summary and assessment report that will allow organisations to review the delivery of services. This can provide valuable information on areas of concern and critical issues, as well as which parts of the service are demonstrating conformance and effectiveness. Apologies, folks, just going to go back a step. Conformance and effectiveness. This has two large advantages. Firstly, areas of effective implementation can be used as examples for sharing good practice, learning, and driving those improvements forward. Secondly, this can allow organizations to focus resources on processes and give context to business cases and workforce planning. Prospective businesses and clients may use accreditation status as a selection criteria when evaluating services and suppliers. As such, accreditation can offer an edge in the competitive market. This includes the provision of our accredited organization search tool on our website. Various schemes, sectors, and industries expect or even have mandatory requirements for service providers to be accredited. Without such accreditation status, an organization will not be able to provide or deliver these services in the UK or even the wider market. Such examples of this are the forensic services in the UK need to be accredited and reviewed against the Forensic Science Regulators Code of Practice. The Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012 requires organizations to be accredited and reviewed against approved codes of practice and guidance. And screening services in healthcare across the UK, such as infectious disease and pregnancy, must be accredited to ensure they meet their governance requirements. Accreditation is a measure of the quality and the delivery of its service. This will demonstrate the organization's commitment to all stakeholders, including its staff, and that it focuses on the best outcome improvements of that service, really demonstrating your measure and ability with engagement with our accreditation process. During the accreditation process and through the assessment, a conformity assessment body or applicant must demonstrate sufficient ability to evaluate and manage risk. This can well support an organization's assurance of this for customers and clients through the dynamic management of risk. And based on a survey of UKAS customers and stakeholder, there was a heavy majority of respondents that stated accreditation provides confidence in the service delivery, improves the quality or validity of work, differentiates service from others, and may provide procurement advantages over like-for-like competitors when demonstrating accreditation requirements. So UKAS, as part of both the UK and global quality infrastructure, provides a world of confidence in the products and services we all rely upon through our independence and expertise. UKAS provides organizations with the knowledge to drive the efficiency and validity of process through the assessment and outputs of the reports. The assessments creates assurance in the accuracy of measurements. Our development workflow supports innovations through the provision of assessment services in new growth areas. And through assessment, there is demonstrated technical competence through review and direct observations of activities. Accreditation assures impartiality processes are in place by independent review. And there are commercial advantages gained at the point of accreditation with the support of the UKAS organized search tool, as well as our verifiable e-certification database. Through UKAS accreditation, there is an increase in international acceptance through the recognition UKAS assessment process and our accreditation symbol. With the air you breathe, the food you eat and the products you buy, UKAS has a part to play. Our aim is that everything that should be underpinned by accreditation is. So over the next few slides, I'm going to outline a little bit more of the assessment process, which might be quite valuable to those who have been through that before, but also very important to those who have not experienced that yet. So in that preparation phase, when you're looking to apply, UKAS expects potential applicants to have implemented an active management system with demonstration of the following evidence to including, but not limited to, suitable coverage of internal audits, robust complaints handling and management of non-conforming work, effective implementation of corrective and preventive actions, and vitally, active engagement with users, customers, and clients with objective demonstration and feedback of these outcomes with clients. There may be other aspects required by your relevant apply for standard, as well as any scheme framework requirements that may be outlined in document, standard, or publications. We would expect you to have a high level of awareness of these elements. However, during the application process and during your conversations with the AMs, you might be supported in signposting to those, and we'll provide some of those signposting to publications in the application process later. Once you've applied, and once you've prepared, your application is accepted by UKAS, you'll be assigned an assessment manager, or AM, who will be there to support you and guide you through the accreditation process. They're your liaison to ensure you can get the most out of the accreditation process. As part of that, the AM will propose an optional preliminary pre-assessment, which is highly recommended you all consider, particularly if you're new to UKAS accreditation or a new organization. In most cases, this will involve some sort of on-site assessment activity with a combination of review of documentation ahead of the assessment and potentially some review of systems and interviewing of key responsibilities. Pre-assessments are a great way to highlight areas of conformance, but outline gaps to allow you to iron out potential problems. Ultimately, it helps you identify any showstoppers that could prevent you from attaining accreditation if you progress directly to an initial assessment. Just as importantly, though, it will help you understand the accreditation process, what to expect on your formal assessment journey, and allow you to begin to develop your relationship with any UKAS representatives, such as AMs, but also customer liaison officers that support in the back office. The pre-assessment would not raise any findings, but would provide you with an overview of your management systems and the reviewed activities. Any issues or gaps would need to be addressed before proceeding to a formal initial assessment. So once you've discussed your service with your AM and you've both determined that you're ready for a formal assessment process, an initial assessment will be scheduled. In most cases, this will have a wider and deeper review of your services and systems than a pre-assessment to allow you to sufficiently demonstrate to us your ability to conform with the standard and demonstrate suitable competence to undertake the activities to which you've applied for. The initial assessment may find issues and raise findings, but at the end of the assessment, the AM will provide all these details on the recommendation or accreditation based on your demonstration during the assessment. The outcome of the assessment will be reviewed by a decision maker within UKAS who is independent in the assessment process, whereby they will make a provisional decision to determine if the assessment has provided sufficient depth and scope, as well as the AM's recommendation is suitable, essentially making sure we fulfilled your needs as well as fulfilling the assessment needs. Where any findings are raised, evidence improvement actions would also need to be submitted to UKAS. They'd need to be reviewed by our team and then fed back to you as the applicant so you can review and improve on those. Once all findings are cleared, there'll be a further review by a decision maker to ensure UKAS has met both your accreditation needs and the requirements by which UKAS are peer reviewed and evaluated. So once we progress with our process, we move to the granting accreditation stage. You'll be sent an offer of accreditation letter, a draft copy of your schedule of accreditation, and an estimate of the assessment days required for ongoing accreditation process. This is known as the 4-year cycle. To continue with your grant, you'll need to review the draft schedule and the form at the end of the offer of accreditation letter. That will need to be completed, signed, dated, and returned to UKAS to ensure you agree with all the processes. If required, any outstanding fees would also need to be paid at this point. Once your documentation is received back at UKAS and the recommendations are accepted, the decision maker is able to grant accreditation and your 4-year cycle will commence. Once that commences, you will receive a grant of accreditation letter and a verifiable accreditation e-certificate, which can be scanned by any clients to provide them with the confidence of your accreditation status, but also allow you to protect your accreditation status and that it's only aligned to you. A schedule of accreditation, which is the list of the scope of your accredited activities, will then be uploaded onto our website to allow any prospective clients to search through when evaluating and selecting services based on the services you provide. So once that's all completed and our 4-year cycle has commenced, this usually typically consists of 3 assessment visits known as surveillance visits. These are conducted in years 1, 2, and 3 with a fuller reassessment in year 4. However, based on your demonstration of conformance, additional visits may be required if felt necessary during that cycle. It is important to note that the first surveillance visit is planned to be conducted 6 months after your grant of accreditation, and therefore may occur in the same financial year as the pre-assessment and initial assessment. So bear in mind that 6-month period is after grant, not when your initial assessment period took place. So bearing all that in mind, how do you get this started? So hopefully the next few stages will explain that a little bit more for yourselves. So how do you begin that route? Firstly, make sure you have a copy of the relevant standard to familiarize yourself and be aware of the impacts on your service. These can be purchased from such sources as BSI or the ISO websites. However, some standards out there are freely available depending on your standard or scheme. Once you have your standard, you will need to have undertaken a gap analysis on the current provision of your service against the standard you wish to apply for. We require this to ensure you're ready to fulfill the accreditation requirements and that we don't deliver an assessment you're unable to complete. The UKAS website has some further links to various mandatory publications such as technical policy statements that will need to be designed into your systems to ensure conformance. So make sure you consider these during the gap analysis stage. Depending on your type of service, there may be further scheme or sector requirements that will need to be aware of and build appropriately into your processes, systems, and services as required. This may include international requirements from the European Cooperation of Accreditation, International Accreditation Forum, or the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation. Once in the application process, your AM can signpost to some of these as required, so you can become more educated on these. Once that's all built and your gap analysis is understood and your designs are being tweaked as required, you would need to complete the relevant application forms, ensuring that all documentation is double-checked prior to submission. This is to ensure that all mandatory requirements are fulfilled to prevent delays in the application, communication, and application of your assessment process. Submitted documentation would also include your application form, an accreditation category form, more formally known as an AC form, as well as any supporting documents as outlined and relevant to your sector. Any missing documents or any documents that aren't quite ready can be discussed with AM to ensure there's no limits and delays on your progression to assessment. As part of that documentation, a signed agreement is required to confirm your adherence to the terms of business, and a fee is required at application to allow us to progress this onwards. Once all these are accepted and financial checks have been completed, you'll be assigned an AM who will contact you regarding your application to discuss your composition of your organization to understand you more so we can meet your needs. The submitted documents and whether any further information will also be reviewed and discussed with you to understand the progression to application and the assessment stage. This is the perfect opportunity to raise any questions on the assessment process, to support in your preparation, as well as discussing any of those pre-assessment options, which again, we highly recommend you consider. So thank you much for listening. We'll now move on to our Q&A session. So please feel free to keep on raising those in the Q&A. Anything, we haven't discussed or we don't get to, we'll address those in the FAQs, but also we'll transcribe those answers back for you later as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dan. We've had a couple in so far, and I imagine more will follow now that we're on to the Q&A phase. The first one is in relation to consistency in assessments. And they've said that they realise the assessment is dependent on the assessor on the day, but sometimes things can seem a little unfair. For example, they currently work in a clinical microbiology lab, and they've been challenged on pipette calibration, yet when the blood science lab was assessed at a different time by different assessors, there was no mention of the pipette calibration there. So how do we ensure consistency in our assessments?
Well, to go to that first point, really, you mentioned about that point of accreditation. It obviously would highly depend on the clinical or critical application of those pipette calibrations. Without fully assessing it, because I assessed that myself, it's very hard for me to delve into that. But it would be very dependent on the validation criteria provided by the laboratory or the organisation to determine, first of all, whether that calibration is required, and determine whether those activities of pipette use are critical. I can't comment on that in detail, but I imagine that potentially in microbiology, some of those pipette volumes may be more critical aspect in determining the intended validity of those results, whereas actually maybe in blood sciences, they may be less impactful. However, that is a very broad brush. When it comes to consistency assessment, focus on a wider area rather than just individual aspects. That is recognised in UKAS, that some of those areas, potentially we're looking for that consistency. So be honest with us, feed that back to us, and we can manage it where we can. But I imagine that if, for example, you were to audit your own systems, if you had 2 auditors, they probably would see things in a very different light. And they may feel that those criteria aren't being met in certain different ways, or levels of conformance have been demonstrated in different ways. So really, we are aware of that. But let us know if you think that is a critical issue. And don't forget as well, this is a collaboration between us and you as a customer. So you are able to challenge those back to the technical assessors and the assessment manager teams to ensure that the clarity and value in that finding is sound. But once again, if you are finding consistent issues, raise those back to UKAS, and potentially in the FAQs, we'll provide those feedback mechanisms that we can do via the website link.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. Another one in from Terry. During initial assessment, is there a time limit on return of actions taken to address findings?
Yes, there is. Officially, that is for any initial assessments plus some other assessments. It's 3 months or 12 weeks, but within our own documentation is 3 months, and that's from the calendar day of the end of the last day of the assessment. Bearing in mind, some of those things might be more long-standing or maybe multi-tiered, and based on that, we are able to have some flexibility in the delivery of those. The reason for that being is at point of initial assessment, you are not accredited. Essentially, you're not on the books, for lack of a better term. So we're able to allow you to stretch that flexibility and determine that corrective action, because what we don't want from you is a rushed response. We would prefer a robust improvement action that makes sure your systems are work and to demonstrate conformance moving forward. So officially it's 3 months, but based on discussions with your assessor manager and based on risk, we're able to extend those as required at initial assessment.
Hopefully that answers your question, Terry. This one, could you please tell me why after an inspection, labs have to clear, well, after an assessment, I think this is, labs have to clear all findings within a month or so, yet it can take UKAS much longer to respond, sometimes a matter of months, to give our evidence and feedback?
I could tell you some of the background reasons, but you are right, there is a minimum turnaround time. The reason for that being is the risk, if you are accredited, we need to make sure those 4-week turnaround times or those months are there. However, UKAS is fully aware of those ongoing delays at the moment, and there are a number of improvement actions that are taking place, which hopefully should start to represent a reduction in those turnaround times and those delays. It's been fully acknowledged by UKAS. We're in a place where we want to get better, and there are improvement actions in that, such as we've taken on in the last 12 months alone, 50 new AMs across all the services and sectors, particularly more in some of those sectors are more impactful. Decision maker training has gone through the roof as well. We're actually now sharing decision makers between sections, as well as workflows that are progressing those decisions through. I will acknowledge that, and I apologize that you've experienced those delays. If they're significant, again, though, we do have those feedback mechanisms. Your first point of contact should be your assessor manager, but where you're getting no responses back on those, please come back to UKAS, because we can't performance manage those without knowing about those first. So again, I do apologize that that's been the case, but we really want to get to a better place, so let us know about those.
Fantastic. Again, hopefully you find that very helpful as a response. The next one is perfect timing. I've got a cat walking past my desk. Sorry, everyone. He wants to be famous. How much is the fee for complete accreditation? Dan, do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, go for it. You probably know more about this.
Yeah, fair enough. So the application fee is £1,500. So when you're ready to apply, that's the fee that you make alongside submitting your application forms and the signed UKAS agreements. The cost of accreditation varies massively dependent on the scope of your application, the standard that you're applying for, your operations, how many offices you have, how many workers, all sorts of different things. So what we have on our website, which we will put out in the FAQs afterwards, is the cost of accreditation. And we've got a number of different scenarios that you can take a look at to see what's the closest match to what it is that you're looking to apply for. Alternatively, if you've got an idea in mind of what it is that you're looking for, then we have a sales team available on sales@ukas.com, who will be able to put some estimates together for you once you know what it is that you will be applying for loosely. So I hope that helps.
Just to add on, so I'm just going to add on to that.
Go ahead.
Don't forget that once you've applied, all that's subject to discussion with your assessment manager. So again, some organisations, particularly leaning on my healthcare background, point of care, will start small in the application to ensure they've got a level of conformance. Once again, build up those business cases. It's not always needed. Some organisations obviously need to apply for everything. But once again, there's a full discussion, and it's always an effort estimate that you can discuss and outline with your assessment manager as well.
Great, thank you, Dan. Another one for you, I think, as a European accreditation, as a European accredited body. What about the recognition of our accreditation in the UK? I will leave this one with you because you answered it so well last time.
Yeah, so currently, and there's a bit more progression on this now as well. As part of that, we are peer reviewed by the European Accreditation Cooperation. So they review us against ISO 17011, but also under EU regulations. I keep on saying 265, but that might be incorrect. We are mutually recognition as the national accreditation body. Essentially every country in the European Union should have only one national accreditation body, but there are exceptions to that. On the back of that, based on the transition during the Brexit period, we are now formally recognised to still be undertaking that across the European community, as well as we have mutual recognition agreements with the IAF, the International Accreditation Forum, and also the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation as well. So we've got multiple recognition agreements, not just in the UK, in the EU, sorry, but across the wider world. So currently we've had a slight progression on that, where we are still currently recognised. And based on that, there's no likelihood of us moving back. The European Accreditation Corporation fully recognises the expertise we can bring to the table, and they still recognise as part of that European Accreditation Cooperation.
Perfect, thank you. One thing that I would say about this one is if it refers to anything that's regulated under the new UKCA system, then currently the majority of regulations do require for the conformity assessment bodies to have legal entities within the UK. So again, if that is something that you're looking to achieve and you'd like accreditation with UKAS and to become a UK approved body for the purposes of the UKCA system, then if you drop a note to sales@ukas.com, again, we'll be able to help you through that process and let you know what you need to do. And I haven't read the next one. These are coming through thick and fast. Thank you, everyone. Can you please break down by year what will happen? Does the 4-year cycle include the 1, 2, and 3 years of the ongoing assessment?
Certainly, I'll try and cover it as concisely as I can because each one is slightly different. So let's ignore your initial assessment of grant of accreditation. Let's focus on that, the 4-year cycle. So generally 6 months after grant, you'll have your surveillance 1. That's very much a kind of sense check to make sure that the things you've implemented, because it's the most risky period to make sure the effective implementation of your services is still in place. Generally, we tend to look at very generalized or a third to a quarter of your services across the activities, locations, and any key responsibilities, plus sampling through some of those management systems. Depending on the standard, we have to look at the same thing every time across some of those years. So in surveillance is 1, we need to look at complaints, management reviews, internal audits, and the effectiveness of corrective actions and EQA. But then we sample those other clause requirements across those standards as required. Surveillance 2 will feel very similar to surveillance 1, but with a bit more breathing space. It's going to be a year after. And your profile month will be based on that 6 months after your grant. Again, you'll be looking at different activities, different key responsibilities. Again, trying to matrix match and look at your competence across your organization. Surveillance 3, again, you're looking at that a little bit something different, but you may cross sample back to some of those events, activities, people, locations that you have on your sites from surveillance 1. And then finally, your reassessment period, which will be that kind of profile month again, tends to be more in depth. The reason for that is we're not going to be maintaining your accreditation. We're looking to renew it at the end of that cycle because you only get 5-year renewal of accreditation. The reason for that being, we'll probably need to sample more of those management activities or demonstrate what we sampled across the previous 3 years. We might look at more risky activities, more critical activities that may be a bit more fragile, or maybe have seen areas of non-conformance in the past to make sure they're in place. But usually we're looking at a vast majority of your services as required as well. And on the back of that then, I'm sure they'll be very successful. And at the end of that, you then move on. So really after your initial grant of accreditation, that's 6 months to surveillance 1, we're kind of subsampling each of those areas over those cycles with a reassessment on the 4th year to make sure we're really holistically reviewing all your services as well. I hope that answered it.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. And that was from Daniel. We've got another one from Andy that you addressed very briefly within the webinar. Who assess UKAS?
So we are peer reviewed by the European Accreditation Corporation, but that seems a bit vague. What they are is they take a number of assessors, peer reviewers from other accrediting bodies who've got the expertise and requirements to do that. So they're competency assessed to undertake that. And they'll be sampled from areas, for example, COFRAC in France, BELAC in Belgium. And they'll sample across those areas and take different accrediting bodies and bring them over to come review us. And they'll evaluate our services doing that. They'll assess different schemes and standards any one time, as well as any extensions to scope, rather like you would go through as customers. For example, our most recent one, I think, was the addition of reference material production for 17034. We got added on, that was a few years ago now. So we're assessed for that compliance and peer review by those different accrediting bodies as part of EA. Hopefully that answers it.
I hope so, Andy, but let us know if anything's still unclear. Another one from Daniel. We said earlier that the terms accreditation and certification are used interchangeably. He's just said, can we confirm that they do mean different things?
Yes, they certainly do. Yeah, most certainly. And also just remember, we've heard that terms in some of the chat and the thing. We assess. There are some inspection activities, don't get me wrong, but generally we assess. We don't audit, we don't inspect. And just to make sure you've got those kind of terminologies correct for yourselves.
And when it comes to certification, so we assess in order to accredit organisations, and we accredit organisations such as certification bodies who will then go on to provide certification to those customers. So UKAS directly don't provide any form of certification. We provide accreditation only to conformity assessment bodies. Hopefully that helps. From Amina, Amina has asked for quite a specific area. So she's asked for asbestos lab accreditation. I think, Amina, if we pick that up offline, because even though it seems like quite a simple sector, there could be quite a lot to that testing. So we need to understand a little more about your organisation to come up with some estimates of costs, but we can certainly drop you a note shortly after this session. Terry's asked, during the 4-year cycle, is the assessor the same, and when do assessors switch around?
Ideally they should, but obviously due to reprofiling, so reprofiling might mean that we change the customer's profile month based on their needs and our needs to resource, and also obviously we have changes of staff and everything else. So ideally yes, but based on the flux and the dynamic needs, that tends to change. Officially, we should change that every 4 years, because what we're looking for as part of that accreditation process into 17011 is fresh eyes on the service to make sure there's no unconscious conformational bias. or assuming we've seen things before. So essentially, we would review the assessment team every 4-year cycle, but assessment managers may be with you for 4, 8, or even 12 years sometimes, depending on the stability of the service.
Excellent. Hopefully that clears things up for you, Terry. Another one from Daniel: is the final assessment part of the grant of accreditation or after the ongoing assessment?
Final assessment.
I think this might refer to the initial assessment being part of the actual grant.
Okay, yeah. So again, just to remind you folks that there's a pre-assessment option that is a type of assessment, but it doesn't generate findings, just gives you a report. Then we have a formal initial assessment stage, which is that potentially what you could call the final assessment after the application stage. Once that's all completed, findings are reviewed, decision makers involved, then we move to grant of accreditation. I'm not too sure though, so if you've not answered that, please give a bit more clarity there as well.
Great, thanks. This one, I don't know whether you should take this or I should. With reference to ISO 17025, what is the current time frame involved in pre-assessment, initial assessment and grant of accreditation, i.e. from the point of submitting an application, how long do we take to process the key steps, or how long do they all take as a general rule?
General rule, ideally at the moment, depends on the sector, because 17025 again is quite wide reaching, whether it's testing, calibration and all sorts of other services. But generally anywhere between 2 to 4 months at the moment prior to application to pre-assessment. And that will be about 3 months then to initial assessment. Progression to grant of accreditation could be anywhere between 3 to 6 months afterwards. But again, that's very dependent on your needs. If there's a business case and that's a priority for you to make sure you're in the competitive market as an accredited organization, talk to your AM, you could submit things faster, you can get your improvement actions settled in quicker. And also as well, don't forget, the initial assessment is there, all assessments are there for conformity. So we're looking for the things you're doing well. But if we do find issues, gaps, findings, then you can submit evidence quicker as well if you want to get that on board and quicker. So essentially, from point of application to grant can be up to 12 months. But that might be a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, depending on your sector.
Perfect.
Right, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that was pretty much spot on. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, I mean, the answer is it really does depend. But as Dan said, if you need things done relatively quickly, then we can try and work to your timeframes as best we can. Whereas if you would like to take much longer, you are also very welcome to, and we'll work with you as you get to that point of being ready for initial assessment. If an organisation has 17021 currently and want to extend the scope to include medical for ISO 13485, will a full application and assessment be required? Dan, do you want to take this, or would you like me to?
I think you take it and I'll add anything on because I'm still learning my way with that one.
That sounds fine, no problem at all. So for 17021, if you are already an accredited organisation, then no, you wouldn't have to submit a full new application. You would be extending your scope to include the new management system for 13485. There may be the need for an assessment, and actually I think it is likely when you're adding a new management system, but it won't be the same as an initial assessment. It will be an assessment ultimately for that extension. So you could look to extend at the point at which your profile month is coming up and your assessment is coming up anyway. So we'll already be there on site, and then we'll cover that part of your scope, that additional section of your scope when we're there. Anything you wanted to add to that, Dan?
No, I think spot on with the assessment type. Is just if you wanted to have a complete management system separation, because that might be required in some organizations, that's completely up to you. But if you don't have to do that, generally the advice is try and align those as much as possible. You've got systems in place, you've got systems that are working, staff are familiar with those things. Don't reinvent the wheel. You don't need to have a whole separate management system.
Perfect, thank you very much. Oh, that's okay. I've seen one from Robert that I think we've already covered. And Amanda has says, we have problems sending a lot of documents, as do some other labs we know of. One of our technical assessors received very few of the documents we sent and nearly gave us a non-conformity for this. Is this an issue that seems to be across the board?
I wouldn't say it's an issue across the board, but it is something infrequently happens. We're heavily reliant on technology at the moment, but also people's technical competence and familiarity. I think early days of remote and COVID, I should remember that in a minute, pretty appropriate. We are getting better at that. But on the back of that, if there is ever a non-conformity going to be raised, it is your kind of, lack of a better term, duty really to demonstrate to us, because again, we shouldn't be there for just findings, we should be there for the demonstration of conformance, what are the things you're doing well. So you did the right thing there. So apologies you experienced that, but I think you did the right thing. I'd say it's infrequently there, and it should be managed appropriately. But again, if you are consistent issues with those, if you have a better system, we could potentially support you with that. Because if you're more familiar with file sharing options or ways of sharing folders, things like that, we want to support you and integrate with you as well. So definitely not ubiquitous, but it is something that's just there because of people's technical competence and awareness as well.
And we are attempting to resolve some of these issues where they are happening. We've got customer portals coming up soon, which will allow you to drop documents straight into a live kind of version of SharePoint that's just your own portal. So all of these things all of our improvements will hopefully improve the service your side as well, and stop you having to send things via email. But there are other options to use Dropbox, other file sharing tools, as well as Dan said. So just talk to your assessment manager if you feel like you're having those problems, and we should be able to come up with another method of dealing with them.
Yeah, I think going to the portal as well, it'll allow you to have more hands-on approach with your documentation as well. So any outputs, those will be more accessible to you, and you might have a better understanding of that 4-year cycle as well, because we're hoping to make that available while we're looking at as well to educate you in what's coming as well.
I hope that's helpful. This one, Dan, I'm going to ask for the brevity in your response because it's a very wide-reaching question potentially. What qualifications are required to be an assessor?
Oh, depends on your assessment field, but that will be reviewed by our teams as section heads of the services. If you're interested more in that, we can certainly provide you some more details on those. If you're just interested in what an assessor needs to come and assess you, we're more than happy to provide you a bit of that background. But we do have specific job specifications or technical competence criteria that need to be fulfilled. And that's peer reviewed by our teams, by our competence teams and our section heads as well. Very, very wide reaching. So I won't go into the detail of any individual requirements.
But that was beautifully brief. Thank you, Dan. And I hope that helps with your question. But again, we'll put some more information out on the FAQs. Are live visits for assessments now back on the cards after the COVID issues after the last 2 years?
Yes.
Dan, very happily nodding there.
Yes.
Yes.
It'll always be a risk-based approach, but also as well, we are taking steps to understand organizations' needs. Do we always need to be on site? I'd say returning back after COVID, we want to come back, you want to see us to make sure there's assurance on both sides, but long term, we're looking for that blended approach long term, because if you're demonstrating a high level of conformance, do we always need to see everything face to face? So that'll be something further on down the line when things settle. So keep an eye on that on UKAS web pages and our social media as well.
Thanks, Dan. And this next one is a question I've not had before, actually. Can I apply for any sort of grant to apply for accreditation? I don't know if you're aware of anything in the market, Dan. There's nothing available through UKAS, but I'm not sure whether there are any business development grants potentially available for this kind of activity, but we might need to go away and check that for you, actually.
Yeah, there's our development options. If it is a new area, sometimes there is subsidies or government grants for those, but certainly we can have a little read round and find some answers for you.
Neither of us knew that one. Okay, sorry we couldn't answer. We'll answer after this. Gavin's asked, is there any accreditation in the pipeline for the hydrogen industry?
I'm assuming you mean hydrogen fuel cells and the production of those. I suspect there's something in the pipeline, because that's going to have to be one of those energy alternatives based particularly on where we're at the moment. There's energy crisis. But I couldn't give you a straight answer on that, but certainly we can go away and have a little look. We do have a development team, so we can have a little look where that's at.
Yeah, definitely check with the development team shortly after. Again, sorry, Gavin, can't address that one right now. Naz has asked, as a UKAS accredited lab, when will be the best time to inform RAM of the changes that will be introduced in the lab, such as new kit and equipment?
Right.
You love this question.
I love this one. So I will always refer you back to your terms of agreement. So if you've not looked at that, please go back and look at your signed terms of agreement. If you're unsure of that, we can provide a link later on, but it's called an F044 document on our website, so you can find that. And particularly section 3, essentially as soon as you can, when you're planning to make those changes. The reason for that being, it might drastically impact your accreditation status because you'll be accredited for certain tests. And some kits and changes may not have any impact on your accreditation outputs, but we would still need to risk review that. Some changes obviously have a higher impact criticality on the outputs of those intended results. So we'd have to review that. As soon as you're planning to change something, contact your AM, let them know about the changes, and you might find actually it doesn't impact the assessment at all. You'd be quite surprised. So as soon as you can.
Brilliant. Always as soon as you can, Naz. I hope that was helpful. Michael has asked, who is the decision maker? Again, wide one. But
yeah, it's a wide one. So essentially they are usually, probably 90% of those are senior assessment managers in UKAS, and they will have been determined to have a higher level of competence on their decision-making ability, including their fuller awareness of not just the standard, but also UKAS processes and 17011. And they tend to be across the service. We used to have section-specific decision makers. We are now starting to share some of our decision-making responsibility across those sections, because what we're looking for really is that the assessment has met those minimum requirements. We're looking for the technical expertise, because that comes from the assessment teams. So there's a lot of them, and at the moment we've got a dedicated pool to ensure we're reducing some of those delays and backlogs.
Hopefully that's helpful, Michael. This might not be either, well, it's not my area, Dan. I know it's not specifically yours either, so we might have to pass this one on. But Tracy's said that she works in a police environment for crime scene investigation, and they've conducted validation work for the majority of their processes.
Yeah.
But does the validation work need to be repeated to be more up to date?
It depends. So validation verification criteria, particularly forensic services, is quite highly regulated and prescribed. It would be very much depend on your requirements and based on risk and criticality. Essentially, very broad brush, but again, part of the assessment process, you would understand that a little bit more, chatting with the AM, is if it's stable and the intended validity of those outputs and reports, particularly forensic services, critical, I would say that might be okay, but again, that would have to be understood. But there might need to be a return and re-verification, revalidation event based on any changes, and there might be a minimum stated review period as well, particularly if staff have changed, data's changed, inputs have changed, any kind of individual changes, you may need to revisit that. But what we will certainly do is give you a more in-depth response from one of our subject matter experts and technical focus people as well.
Perfect. Again, hopefully that is helpful for you. I think Tracy had asked a question earlier about Dropbox and SharePoint, or I know we were speaking about it already. Tracy said that she was sent a link, but without guidance on how to use SharePoint, and she ended up interrogating YouTube to try and work it out herself, and then continuing with the assessors. They ended up having to email everything, as I think it continued to be a problem on the SharePoint. So that's definitely a takeaway for us, and we'll pass it on to the teams that are using SharePoint to help you get all of the documents across. I think a how-to guide would be really useful, so we'll definitely pass that feedback on. But I suppose in the meantime, we just apologise that you had any issues. It is the problem with a virtual world, definitely.
And thank you for being a problem solver as well, Tracy, for figuring that out yourself. But yeah, that shouldn't have been the case.
How long should we expect to wait to hear about the assessment date after passing stage 2? So I imagine this is to do with COVID-19 testing. Do you know the timeframes at the moment, Dan, after stage 2?
It's, I think it's been a bit flexible based on the government changes and requirements particularly. So we can certainly get you a more definitive answer?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is either go to the person that responded to your stage 2 or go to the MedLabs customer care team, who would have probably emailed your stage 2 through to you with that query. As Dan said, it does depend a lot on your application date, when you're due for assessment and all sorts of other things. But if you feel like you've been waiting too long, please don't hesitate to chase the team, and we'll be able to look into where that is for you. Hope that helps. Gavin said, he asked about the hydrogen earlier. He said, know anything in relation to H2, and how does he get in touch with the development team, please? So we'll sort that for you, Gavin. We'll have your email address having registered on this. So if you could just bear with us till later on this afternoon, we'll get you in touch with the development team if they're working on anything. Fantastic, thank you. No
We're down to
problem
4.
at all.
We're down
You're
to
very
4,
welcome. We're down to 4, but there are some over in the chat.
Okay.
So we can address those if we get time. We've got 5 minutes left. So those 2 from Gavin are now answered. So we're actually, and that's a thank you. So we're down to 2. Does the management system need to cover all standards we are planning to get accreditation for?
Yes.
Ultimately, yes.
Do a gap analysis, and you might find that particularly with the alignment, a lot of the 1700 series, if you're doing that, I don't know what your standard is, and also 159 is likely to mirror that in the future for medical laboratories. Gap analysis it and analyze it, and you might find actually there's a lot of overlaps. So yeah, focus on the gap analysis to ensure your design meets those requirements.
And finally, finally in the Q&A pod, if an accredited organisation loses its technical manager for whatever reason, does it put the accreditation at risk if they haven't replaced that role in a timely manner?
Ooh, it depends.
I like that question.
It's good. It's good. It would be heavily dependent on your key roles, responsibilities, deputizations, delegations. If you already have somebody that is designated and measured as competent by your own requirements to undertake any delegations or deputizations of that technical manager role, you might be fine. But again, you would have to communicate that with the AM, because that is a significant change in personnel, which is a requirement to communicate as part of your signed agreement in line with terms of business, that F044 form. What I'd strongly suggest you to do, contact your AM, have a conversation with them, explain to them the situation, any mitigation of risks you have in place, and therefore then they can discuss that with you. If there is nothing in place, brutally honestly, if that is a risk, it could affect your accreditation status. But again, if you communicate that with the AM, we can mitigate that, have a chat about that, and understand what we can do to support you to maintain where we can.
Brilliant, thanks Dan. So Michael, just let us know where you are with it. If you've already communicated it to your AM, then they should be able to answer that question for you. Can evidence collected during training be used to assess initial competency? This is one in from Jeff.
It depends. I love this one. So it is down to you to determine the level of competence required to fulfill any designated role or responsibility. That could be from technical aspects, and I'll always talk about the higher aspects as well, so senior management, training team, quality manager, the directors of services. All the competence needs to be measured, determined, and documented. You can certainly use that. And don't forget, most of the things, because my previous role was a training coordinator in the NHS, most of those documents and tasks you undertake on a daily basis, if not more often. So you potentially could use that as evidence for yourselves. But if you're going to do that, you need to define, design, and document those processes, the 3Ds, to make sure you've got consistency in measuring competence for all those roles and responsibilities across your service. So it's certainly a possibility, but only when you define that for yourselves.
Excellent. Okay, that's all of the ones through the Q&A, and it looks like most of them have already been duplicated, bar one that still remains in the chat, which was, do you have technical assessors in Middle East for ISO 17021? So as the national accreditation body for the UK, the majority of our assessors are based here in the UK. There is also a national system of accreditation, so the majority of countries have their own nationally appointed accreditation body. So what we would usually recommend you do is the first port of call is your national accreditation body. And again, we in the FAQ, we can put some signposting to the IAF, who kind of oversee a lot of the accreditation bodies who manage 17021 certification bodies. So we can point you in that direction, and if there is a local accreditation body in your country, then we recommend you go to them directly, as long as they can cover your scope. UKAS do consider applications from overseas organisations. However, we put them through an overseas process, which will usually involve us asking you to also make sure that you can't get it from the local accreditation body, because the idea is that if it's accredited in one country anywhere around the world, it is then accepted everywhere else. And that is everyone.
Look at the timing on that.
Look
Awesome.
at the timing. Thank you to all of those of you who have stayed on right till the very end. We've still got lots and lots of people still here, which is really nice to see. We hope you found the webinar very useful. We hope you found the Q&A useful as well. I certainly did. I always enjoy watching Dan answer questions. Shortly after this, you will receive the recording once it's been uploaded in the next couple of days, and also a copy of the presentation. But if you have any questions, get in touch. You've got communications@ukas.com there up on the screen, and our mainline number. And as I said before, you can also reach us at sales@ukas.com. You're very welcome, Cheryl, Naz. Thanks ever so much for the thank yous. Thank you, Nuno. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending. Thank you for the questions. It's been fab. Don't forget to check us out on the social media stuff as well. I'm the only Daniel Boyland on LinkedIn, but there's also UKAS. You can follow up on those bits as well. So always good to get you updates from there as well.
Absolutely. Right. Let's hope that our community